Welcome. And today we have historian Michael Dixon with us, and he is going to talk to us about, we have been here before, Delmarva during the 1918 pandemic. If you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A box, and I will ask Mr. Dixon at the end of his talk. So please welcome him. Thank you, and take it away.
Well, thanks, everybody. Thanks for having me. I'd like to thank the library for having me, and also thank you for spending a little bit of time here with us this evening. I am going to switch over and actually put the PowerPoint up. So if it's not working, let me know. But in just I'm going to do another thing, share sound too. So we got that set. And okay. You should now be seeing some flowers, a beautiful scene and a topic we're not going to talk about that connects with it too well, but it's called Delmarva and the Pandemic of 1918. So if I don't hear anything from anyone, I'll assume we are good to go with that. So my name is Mike Dixon. I'm a historian, and I specialize in studying social history, which is just the history of everyday people. It's not the big headline stuff, or certainly not famous people that I study. But so really what brought me to this topic, a couple of years ago, we marked the 100th anniversary of the Spanish flu. And it's sort of like a forgotten chapter in history, and there was a group that was interested in it. Well, that was one thing, but that was like, what, two plus years ago, now 3 years ago. And then came last March, and we got all this disturbing news. What was it, like really unsettling times. And to some degrees, there was really significant parallels between that earlier era that was so lethal and so disruptive to so many lives that I was asked to put together a program for Delaware Humanities, focusing on how the pandemic effect of 1918 affected Delmarva, the Peninsula, and also if there were connections today, if there were things that we could talk about. Now, you'll see some of the points that we'll take into consideration this afternoon as we meet. But as we go through the program, if you have questions, in fact, please pop right into the chat box and let's talk about them. Now, so whatever you come up with, how to research them, how to family stories, by the way, that would be like really, really wonderful. If you have family stories, if you want me to comment or clarify, or if you have thoughts or opinions. But let's go back for the moment to 1918. If you can imagine, as folks turned that calendar all over the peninsula, Christmas Eve into January 1st. And just as we turned the calendar in 2020, they had no idea. We could not have known what was coming in just a few short months. And for them, they could not have anticipated how disrupted and how shattering, how grim 1918 would be. Now they had,
Johnny, get your gun, get your gun, get your gun. Back in on the run, on the run, on the run. Yeah, I'm calling you and me, every son of liberty. Hurry right away, not delay, go today. Make your daddy glad to have a head.
Let me back up on that and not have the sound speak over me. Now, they had, they were facing one major emergency. I mean, this country is going to confront two great threats. And they were fully aware of that when the calendar turned, because you see, back in April of 1917, the old retiring year, the country got on a war footing. We were reluctant about it, reluctantly got involved, but here we were. World War I is underway. And they knew that when they turned the calendar. In fact, all across Delmarva, some 2,000 men from Delaware, or 10,000 men rather from Delaware, 62,000 from Maryland, some number from the eastern shore, smaller number from the eastern shore of Virginia. They're going to answer that call, and they do it very ideal. It was amazing how idealistic we were. And in places like Salisbury, they would have walked off, been escorted to the depot by the bands, or Pocomoke City, or Snow Hill, or Princess Anne, maybe the steamboat, depending on where we are around Delmarva. And they were going to be reporting to camps like Fort Dix, Camp Meade, many other places. And some 2,000 of these young men are going to never come home. Well, that they had, and that everybody understood. And we were on a wartime footing. There's the equivalent of a wartime production board that's deciding what you can buy. Now, one of the things about the peninsula is it's almost like you're studying two areas. See, there's that urban area up to the north in Wilmington, and then you got the rest of the region. Well, Wilmington it's almost like a different, but it is a different scenario. It's like a war boom town. I mean, you got the DuPont company, you got all the chemical companies, the black powder, the manufacturing, but they're building ships, rail cars, you name it. Well, the population is just full, and that's going to be one of the things that plays an impact on the mortality and the morbidity as we go through 1918. Well, that was one killer. That was the one they knew about, and they know about it because there had been deaths that come home, and great tragedies. And this region, especially north part of the peninsula, hums with war-related activity. There's Fort DuPont. Just across the river, where the Delaware Memorial Bridge goes across, there's the DuPont Powder Works. That thing employs like 18,000 people in a county, rural Salem County, if any of you are familiar with it, only had about 20,000 people. And then there's the rest of the peninsula, places like Easton, the big space, Easton, Salisbury, Cambridge. I think that's probably the big spots. And then you'd run into Chestertown and Georgetown and things like that. They're not large. And to some great degree, that's going to be one of the things that has an impact, density of population and also mobility. But make no mistake about it, wherever you were, whether it's in Salisbury or someplace else, the war has come home to you, and you're greatly involved in patriotic efforts. Salisbury's hovering around, let's just use some round numbers, around 7,000 people, where Wilmington's 120,000. Dover, I guess I should have mentioned that. Well, that's that war threat, but I keep talking about the second lethal killer, the silent killer, mysterious killer that's going to go on a rampage. It gets its start, it seems, and the scientists debate this. I mean, there's a few theories, but one of the ones they accept is that there was an outbreak of a spring flu at a military camp in Kansas that March early. And it begins to spread. Local doctors note it, and then it subsides. So they'll talk about waves. Well, think of how mobile people are. Today, we're mobile because there are jet planes, moving us all around, and we're around in hours. Well, for 1918, don't forget the mobility that's going on. People are going overseas, more mobility than ever. Well, come fall of that year, very, very late August, maybe early September, there's no missing this outbreak, okay? This is the medical community, particularly the military medical community. They were very aware of the March outbreak. But also, you didn't want to talk about this too much. You wanted to kind of play it down. Well, come August, September 1918, it is going to, there is no way not to play it down. Now, what I'd like to do, unless it gives me trouble, and it's acting up, let me see here. Let me go back. I'd like to play a little clip for you. And that's not what we wanted to do. Stand by just a minute and I'll recast this and do it again. Make sure I hit the play button. Stop share. I'm going to just reshare is all I'm doing. Reshare, include sound. It says that. See if we can get it to work this time. And if not, we will just go right on. So at this point, you should be seeing, and in just a moment, you're going to hear. And what I will do is I will send out a list to the library of some recommended sources. This is a very long documentary, but let's watch just 3 or 4 minutes of it. If the sound's working, if it's not, somebody let me know.
In bustling cities and remote villages in the United States and around the world, orphaned children cried for their parents in 1918. People of all cultures struggled with the same terrible threat, and within a matter of months, as many as 50 million would be dead. What was that deadly threat?
We had just come from a few years before from Mexico. My 2 brothers were in one room sick. I was sick in the other bedroom with my mother. Mother told me that I thought her black hair was a cat, and I was afraid of it with the delirium from the high fever.
My father's name is Telesfor Reyna. At that time, he was working in Tennessee for a DuPont company. He would always bring up the story about how he got sick while he was in Tennessee and how a lot of people from the village that had gone were brought back sick. In 1918, my mother was like just 11 years old, but she remembers the church bell would ring every day. There's a certain bell, a notice for the death. And she said she remembers as a little girl how awful it sounded.
Back in 1918, I was between 10 and 12 years old, I would say. And I got the flu, and it was just my mother and I. We were 2 of my friends. We went to elementary school together, and both of them were stricken with the flu. And I would go out to Bayview Hospital, and they'd put her out on a porch in the cold winter time, and they had blankets and a hood on, but she died. Both of them died.
My mother was the midwife, and she tended to the people, the delivery of babies. She used to take me with her to go and visit the new mothers, and I loved to go see the new babies. And I cried because at that time she didn't want to take me with her because she was tending to the sick and the dying. One thing that stayed in my mind was the pounding of the nailing of boards together, making, I call them boxes, coffins for the people.
An influenza pandemic is the emergence of
move
a
ahead
very
just a
new
moment,
influenza
and I will
A
send this
virus
link to
to
the
which
library
most of the
to the
population
full item.
has not previously been exposed.
In virtually every country affected.
In 1918, there wasn't even a realization that the pandemic flu was caused by a microbe, by a virus. They had no idea what it was. There were no vaccines at the time, nor were there any treatments directly against the virus. And there wasn't the intensive care capabilities that we now have in hospitals. We are infinitely better prepared now than we were 100 years ago, back in the beginning of the 20th century.
Now that is, we heard the bell from the National Public, U.S. Department of Public Health, and it's a full long video, and it runs for about an hour. So I will send that to you as a link later on, because there are a couple things you may want to look at. Now, I mentioned that this is more about Delmarva and the impact here. Well, come September, local newspapers really hadn't picked up on it so much until that point. But come September, the newspapers are beginning to talk about it. they're picking up more of it from for instance, out of the military camps. There's some thought that this is a part of the German war effort, that they've let loose a mysterious bug virus or killer. There was talks like there was a submarine seen off the Maryland, Delaware coast releasing things. And somewhere in that mid-September to the end of September mark, it's moved from military bases. It has moved to Delmarva. I can almost track, almost, not quite perfect, but I can almost see it coming down the peninsula. And you know what I think it was? It was the railroad line. And I'm basing that on looking at the newspaper accounts. Well, anyway, the military is devastated. Government actually clamps on as much as they can. Censorship rules. You see, you don't want the Germans to know how bad things are. Of course, everybody was suffering, and that's an interesting point. It's the reason it's called the Spanish flu. The only folks, the Spanish were not in the war, so their media was reporting this regularly and even much more intensely than we were here. And so everybody said, well, that's where all the news is coming from about it. It must be the Spanish flu. The reality was it just wasn't getting reported and had nothing to do with Spain. Now, here's an interesting statistic. More people die from disease during World War I than die from hostile action, German bullets, however you want to say it. So in the Marine, for the soldiers, 50% of all death was related to disease. 43% was from battle wounds, and the 7% other is things like accidents. So it's 125,000 people, men die. And so we're looking at about what, 63,000 from disease. Look at the Navy, by the way, and it just makes sense based on how contained the situation was. By far, at a much greater level, disease there. When I was doing some research for this, the folks at Parsons Cemetery in Salisbury were a lot of help. And they gave me a list of some of the local shore soldiers from the Salisbury area that are rest there or died from influenza. There are two people, if somebody were to say to me, who were the first victims of influenza on Delmarva that I've been able to come up with. Dr. John Fisher, he's a Wilmington physician. He'd graduated from the University of, or Delaware College at the time, University of Delaware. And his final resting places in Wilmington and Brandywine. And so he dies in the service of the country up in Boston. Now he's a Navy doctor, so he's on those ships where the outbreak is like really intense in Boston. It's the center of the second outbreak. Also, you see Major Burston there. He's a U of D sub student. But what gets my attention with Dr. Fisher is he was one of the early victims of the flu, and he comes home to rest. And the Wilmington papers will report that. Now, a couple of things. There was a National Public Health Service. There was a Surgeon General, and mostly the public health officials were related to fighting. Well, they were fighting. Public health was very much an emerging professional practice coming out of the late 19th century, the 1880s. Well, he would be Dr. Fauci of that particular period. And he'd come out of a division called the Marine Hospital Service. They had an operation over at Lewis, Delaware. It was a quarantine hospital. I'm going to use my laser pointer here. It was a quarantine hospital. And what would happen is the hospital would serve both mariners who needed sickness, but its bigger function was that of processing immigrants who were coming into the country. They had to stop there for quarantine to be assessed, in order to prevent disease from coming into the country. So Dr. Fisher, Lieutenant Fisher's one, and the other young man I come up with is an early victim. And it's an interesting, his connection as really a frontline hero, a frontline essential worker. They would not have thought about it at that time, was that he was a telephone operator. He is from Georgetown, and he is buried in Georgetown. He would leave rural Sussex County, the county seat, and go up for the academic year to complete his studies at what was called the Delaware College. Now, he was a very industrious young man. He was a correspondent for the Wilmington papers, which gives me a lot. He was a real athlete, and he worked a lot of jobs too. He was, one of his jobs happened to be as the night switchboard operator and in Newark, Delaware. And Newark gets a real outbreak from this. Now, one other thing that happens here is up in Philadelphia. Now, they're aware of how bad this is. It was important to raise money for the war effort. So everybody, Worcester County, Wycomico, you name it, were involved in these Liberty loan drives where you like savings, the government bonds. Well, Philadelphia was decided not to cancel theirs. In other places, there was a train coming down the Delaware Road, down through Dover and Salisbury, and it was a patriotic fundraising effort. They had war-injured soldiers on board. Well, they canceled that downstate, but up in Philly, you think of Philly, 200,000 people. They go ahead with it. 200,000 people attend. And there was discussion about, well, we should not do this. Look at this curve here. Philadelphia is one of the most stricken. I'm going to get my laser back up for you. Philadelphia has one of the highest incident rates, meaning it was most stricken. They're running 250 deaths per 100,000 right after the Liberty Savings Bond drive. 200,000 people in close proximity, no social distancing, no masking, whatever the protocols were available. For comparison, St. Louis early on, because it's going to spreads off the coast into the center of the country, in this case, implements social distancing protocols. And they got a much greater reduction. So this is deaths per 100,000 people. So look at this at the peak. Well, they get a little delayed peak over there, but what are they coming in around? What do you see? About 50 deaths versus this early peak in Philadelphia. So they probably achieved herd immunity like they did not want to up in Philadelphia with 250,000 deaths. Let's watch this short video if it works for us. And you should have sound.
The one thing they knew then, and that we obviously know now, that could have stopped the pandemic or slowed it was social distancing, keeping people away from each other.
Perhaps the most tragic example comes in Philadelphia that fall. On September 28, 1918, a crowd of nearly 200,000 floods the streets for a Liberty Loan Parade.
There were numerous doctors urging the cancellation, but the local public health director insisted that the parade go forward.
It's a public health disaster as the flu spreads to thousands in the city.
Philadelphia falls apart. The hospitals become overwhelmed, the graves become overwhelmed, the cemeteries become overwhelmed.
There are over 15,000 people killed in Philadelphia from the pandemic. There are hundreds, literally hundreds, of people dying every single day.
Young seminarians from the Catholic Archdiocese are the unsung heroes of the city of brotherly love.
They remove hundreds of bodies from the homes. Some of them have been dead for a week or 10 days, and it's October, and this is not the dead of winter. In one cemetery, we've got almost 3,400 bodies that go into the ground, many of them in mass graves.
Even when the Philadelphia health authorities change course and close public meeting places, the newspapers still don't tell the truth.
When they finally after all this, closed schools, banned all public gatherings. One of the newspapers even said this was not a public health measure. You know, how stupid did they think people were?
So that little item there is from the Smithsonian, but Philadelphia is a problem, and it's also a problem for our region up north because of the there were rail lines. There were plenty of people commuting from Philadelphia or Wilmington to Philadelphia, both commuters for work, shopping, and so it really seeds it up. I think that's one of the things that seeds it. It could not have been worse for our region. You know, our medical facilities are strained. You see, a lot of the young doctors, actually the most skilled practitioners, the healthiest, those in the prime of their lives, they have been recruited from the war effort. And so to provide care, it leaves older doctors are the most youngest inexperienced doctors. And in Wilmington, there were several hospitals. Wilmington has urban characteristics, like the Delaware Hospital and Osteopathic General. Eventually, they'll get consolidated to become the General. But you know, when you come down the peninsula, it's a different situation. So take Delaware, south of the C&D Canal. In 1917, there were two hospitals. There was Beebe Hospital. The two doctors had started it, still there. And then there was Milford Emergency Hospital. Well, Milford Emergency has to close because they no longer have a doctor because of war effort. One of the Dr. Beebes is recruited to goes off to fight the war. And then down in Salisbury, from the 1890s, you had Peninsula General Hospital, started in the 1890s, 6-bed hospital. But that was it in terms of intensive medical care. Now, you know who, I don't know, honestly, I don't know that it made a lot of difference with the doctors because there wasn't much doctors could do. It was very hard to get to see a doctor, and a couple of them will die here, probably more than I know about. But you know who the caregivers are that make the difference? The ladies, nurses, but also homemakers. Look at this young group right here. They're going to have their career minted by two double tragedies. Two of those ladies are going to die before this is over. One will go off and serve because nurses are also heading into Red Cross nursing duty in France and in camps along the way. Don't they look like they're having a wonderful time? But a tragedy is ahead for them as time turns. Nurses were the essential caregivers, and add to that the wives, the ladies, the homemakers. Because, you know, the reality was there was little the doctors could do. But nurses, the homemakers, they could provide palliative care. Heating, cooling when you're sweating, ventilation, warm soup for nourishment. There are really no treatments. There's no vaccine, sort of like we've gone through now, we're turning a different corner. No antiviral drugs, no antibiotics, not much the physician could offer. Aspirin was a new thing that was used a lot. It wasn't a new thing, but it had been around a little bit. And in Washington, Surgeon General Blue, without the rapid communications that we have today, he is issuing his orders. We recognize them, at least you will recognize them as you take a look. And the library is recording this, so you can go back and look at these. So let's go with the poster. It provides a quick visual for precautions that we recognize today. Don't talk into my face. Don't shake my hand or spit into your handkerchief. Stay home if you have a cold. Well, you know, they're not calling it social distancing, but that's what they're practicing and things like that. The first place in Delmarva to react as a public reaction was the Newark, Delaware City Health Department. Most of the cities in Delaware had their own health departments. where in Maryland we'll have county health departments. And so on September 24th, they've got a terrible outbreak. Number one, there's like an ROTC camp there for training soldiers. There's a lot of mobility with students coming and going. Newark shuts down, just like we did last March. And they close the schools, the theaters, the pool halls, the taverns, any place people might gather. And they're ordering you to take extra hygiene, keep your kids off the street. Very similar to the things that we watch so cautiously and with such alarm back in 2020. And the outbreaks are big. The outbreaks are really big. Well, I mentioned Mr. Roach. This is his grave over in Georgetown. Now, he was 26 years old, night operator. So he would go to school in the daytime, write as a correspondent, part-time correspondent to the newspaper in Wilmington, and he worked the switchboard at night. He's another early victim. The students will escort en masse his coffin to the Middletown train station. And there they'll be loaded on the afternoon train to Georgetown, Delaware. Now I can pick up his story through the death certificates at the archives and various places and put them back. And as we turn, the calendar turns from September to October, it's got an alarming grip on Wilmington, like 100 deaths. That October, look what happens in Salisbury. On October 3rd, Salisbury's mayor declares a public health emergency. And this is out of the NAB Center, the proclamation that you see there. And if you were to read it, it's exactly what officials did in the current year. Stay home, stay off the street. Don't make unnecessary trips. All places of public assembly, schools, churches. Can you imagine what that first Sunday was like on the Lower Shore? And while I may not have the date for every county here, they're all doing about the same thing. Salisbury was a few days early to react. The state of Maryland will follow with a state order in a day or so here. And look at the outbreak in this white area right here. Snow Hill, they're reporting 100 cases of influenza in October, 90 in November, and 145 at December. And then at Snow Hill, rural free delivery, meaning, you know, the countryside postal delivery, so outside the city. And so you can see the cases as they're stacking up here. Pocomoke City, 121 in cases reported October, 19 in November, 52 in December. Berlin, 67, 39. You can take a look at those just a little bit later. So the cases are beginning to stack up. And there's like a silence as just about every town on Delmarva is reporting an alarming death toll of the likes that they have never seen. Little Selbyville, just over the line, 5 deaths reported in a week. The War Trophy train that we were talking about earlier, that's the one for the bond drive. It was scheduled to come down into Salisbury. It is canceled. And the streets are empty, much as our streets were empty. And maybe we went out for a walk. You know, they'll comment that, you know, you go into the towns and there's nobody about. And you look at each other wearily, maybe as we did, wearily. Well, here comes the state public health order in Delaware, October 4th. Maryland is right behind that. The federal, the Public Health Service, their Dr. Fauci, they are printing posters and informational graphics. And you'll see the Salisbury paper picks up on a very long list, a message from the Surgeon General about the things we could do for the flu and the things we could do to avoid the flu. I think if you modernize the language, it's about what they could offer to us in early in this as winter of 2020 folded into the spring of 2020. Now, overall, I think people were compliant, at least either that or the paper suppressed it. I don't see a lot of resistance. There were pockets of resistance around the country. This is out in LA. And LA moved pretty fast. Dr. Powers was their public health official. And you can see here's the Spanish flu, and he's out with Miss LA, having a good time while the Spanish flu's off to the side. But here's a kid, he let her flu. He's tickled to death. There's no school, and theaters can't open. They're saying why it's censored. There was some degree of that, but mostly either it wasn't reported, which is some possibility. The other thing is about our region is especially as you get downstate, it's so very rural. You probably were more than happy to stay out in Newark, down your area in Newark, to stay on the farm and stay out of the way. And so this is a political cartoon out of Indianapolis. The passenger's on a train, and look who is riding with him, but the Spanish flu. Now, who were the essential workers in 1918? They were there. And one I had not anticipated, but as soon as it came up, it made a lot of sense. Think of your telephone operators. You know, in Snow Hill, you had a switchboard. Berlin had a switchboard. Pocomoke City, Princess Anne, you name it. Any town of any size that had modern communications. And these ladies would sit shoulder to shoulder, working the switchboard, taking the calls, making the connections. And when the flu would rip through them, it would rip through. There are reports of Dover loses almost all of its switchboard operators. They can't keep up with the phone calls. Up in Wilmington, they take out an ad. Before they'd been saying, where you're isolated and have to stay at home, don't forget, you can be in touch with people. Pick up the phone and call. Within a month or two, their ads are saying, keep the phones open and available for wartime communications. About the only place that had a large police department, Salisbury had 3 or 4 officers, but Wilmington had a force of over 100 men. And it was really, Dover had a couple of officers, maybe 3 or 4 officers. They stopped making arrests in 1918. First off, all the troublemakers and the wayward types, they aren't hanging out in the bar rooms, and the bar rooms are closed. They're going to lose an officer. Officer Riley, he dies from the flu. The last thing he did was escort young inductees from Delaware to the train station to go off to war. Now, we're going to continue sending people off to war. In fact, Woodrow Wilson will make that decision. You see General Pershing's over there, and he's got a tough campaign ahead of him just about this time, and he needs hundreds of thousands of soldiers. And Wilson, almost in tears, will say, yes, continue sending them. Well, that's creating mobility. At the Delaware State prison system, called the workhouse in those days, they lose an officer. There are a couple of prisoners that die. And those ladies that we talked about a few moments ago on the front line, they are really heroes on the front line. They're taking care of the sickest of the sickest. When there's no cure for them either, or no protection for them, and with people dropping dead all around them, these ladies are standing at their side, and at least 14 across the peninsula are going to die doing their job. Let me read this quote to you from the superintendent of the Delaware Hospital. The outbreak took one nurse after another until out of a quota of 42, scarcely a dozen remained. When our first pupil nurse died, not one nurse flinched or showed a sign of fear, but each kept on with her work as loyally as ever. By the way, that first pupil nurse was out of Hartley, Delaware. 2 sisters. Dybeck was their name. Will fall victim to the flu. They were both young, and they were student nurses. And they leave Hartley, Delaware, outside of Dover, to go to Wilmington to learn a profession. Now, there were at least 14. So Dorchester County loses 3 nurses. There are a few in other places. I haven't found anybody in the Worcester area or Salisbury, and I have looked for Salisbury, especially with the hospital. A couple of the doctors, Dr. Thomas Riggin from Laurel Dye, a Wilmington doctor, man, they're all in the front line. There's not much they can do. The undertakers are going to die doing this. Undertakers couldn't get the coffins that they needed. There was one account out of Wilmington that the officer said he saw a man in the middle of his life carrying a little box down the street crying. It was a cracker box, big cracker box. His child was in there. They couldn't get a grave digger or a coffin. Takes him out to a cemetery at the edge of the city, and he digs the grave for his child. I mean, this is really, really a sad time. And I don't know the way I describe it, if I'm doing justice to it. Druggists were on the front line. And by the way, there were plenty of cures. They had their quinine. They had, they had all sorts of cures offered up to have some onions. Yeah, onions. Surely help. How about a little smoko tobaccoless cigarette? I don't know. By the way, they did have Vicks Vapor Rub. And I don't know if you ever go up by the Conowingo Dam, stop by Doc Reagan's. You see, he had this Doc Reagan's favorite liniment. I don't know how well you can see this. It's for not war, man or beast. You could give it to your horse too to help you out. Well, the druggists are overloaded. The military tells their soldiers to gargle, to wash out the virus. And these are soldiers down up at Fort Dix virusing. These folks are from Selbyville. You want to escape the flu? Imagine how modern they thought they were in that time. But you know what? They could have had music, just like we were talking as we started the program, with all of the things we have access to with streaming books and audio books and e-books and Netflix and things like that. Well, they did have the Edison phonograph to keep them company. The druggists, they were exhausted. They were compounding drugs from morning to night, could not keep up. In just about every area I look at that is the case. They could not keep up. Ambulances in Wilmington are going day and night. The DAR had donated an ambulance to the Newark College because it was a war center, and they did it in 1917 before they knew what it was going to be put used to, but they had to put that in service in Wilmington just to keep up with the folks who were suffering so greatly. And of course, anywhere you find a military encampment, you're going to find, because that's the connectivity, that's the transmission, where the transmission of the disease is coming. Well, finally, come the end of October, there's a little light at the end of the tunnel. You see, Salisbury's been shut down, and deeply shut down, for about 27 days here. So let's say a month. And that pattern will work as up and down the peninsula, a little bit different depending on the day and the different place. You can see here Salisbury reopening, Newark is reopening. And so it begins to fade. There will be one more wave, winter, and we saw a little bit of that. And so often I'm asked, well, what about context? How does it compare? And remember, we're still working our way through this one. But as it stands right now, the Spanish flu, the pandemic of 1918, was the worst plague of modern medical history. Here's just some numbers that might be a little bit off. I haven't, the numbers changed so fast, but we're probably hovering around I imagine 450,000 deaths, but our population is 300,000 now. So you've got a multiplication factor there. In the pandemic of 19, and these numbers, they really have trouble getting these numbers right. I mean, the caregivers the doctors were so rush to try to keep up with things, but they believe we lost somewhere in the 175,000 range when our population was 1/3 smaller. So if you increase that by 3, of course, we're still in the middle of this. So we're gonna see what happens. Here were these waves that would break out. So early in 1918, there was a less virulent outbreak out in Kansas and a few other places. Boy, this is lethal. That's like that September to October wave, a little bit off for the summer, kind of like we saw, a little bit of a break. And then come the winter of 1919, December, head into January and February, there's another outbreak. In January of 1918, Rehoboth Beach, Delaware has to shut down the schools again because of the outbreak. Now, I always try to put some numbers on this. And so it's really hard. Number one, influenza, the flu, wasn't a reportable disease when 1918 rolled around. You didn't have to report it. It was just the flu. They called it the grip. And so that's a problem. There was probably a great deal of underreporting, but as best I can pull up public health reports and death certificates. So here's Wicomico County, to give you an example. And I'm not sure, how carefully they were able to classify the disease. So my thought is, how many more deaths occurred than normally would occur? So if I took a little line through here, let me get the cursor laser up. If I took a little line and said, what does this average out to? It's about 440 deaths a year. And you can see it's pretty consistent. Some years a little bit better, but it's consistent. Well, look what happens in 1918. We get a 38% increase, and we're up just over 600. Well, those deaths came from somewhere, and I think largely that's attributed to the flu. This is Delaware. Delaware runs somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000. Delaware is even worse because the federal public health officials did not recognize Delaware as what they call a registration area. I mean, they hadn't got their vital statistics stuff uniformly enough set up that they were accepted. This gives you an idea about rural areas. So the more urban, this is deaths per 1,000, the more urban they were, the more deaths you had. Now, they had an explanation of why rural Newcastle County was ahead of Wilmington. They had set up emergency hospitals because the city's hospitals couldn't handle it. They were just outside the city limits, so they would take the most sick to these places like the DuPont Country Club just outside the city, and they would die there, so they would get tabulated. But look as we come downstate, okay, 16.5. By the way, Worcester County was 17.7, so somewhere in that range, right in through there. And so those numbers are what tend to pile up. Well, then I did that a little fast. So here's where I got some of my material. And we're getting ready to switch back to you. So if you've got some questions or things you would like to chat with, let's do that for a few minutes. I got some of I use your NAB Center as a wonderful center for research, and the Delaware Archives and lots of other places. And as we were talking when we got started, so much of this has been digitized with like the NAB Center and the Somerset County Library have digitized their newspapers. But it was a time that greatly impacted many families, and it shattered lives. I think that in your county, there was something like an additional 150 to 200 deaths, and that's a lot as a percentage. So how about if I stop share and I come back to you on the screen, and if you've got a few things that we could talk about or discuss, I'll be glad to do it. And I would love family stories if we have anything, Elena, too.
If anybody, you can put your questions in the Q&A box, which is going to be at the bottom if you're on a desk or a laptop, and at the top if you're on a tablet or iPad. If you want to talk, just raise your hand, and I will. There's not a lot of us, and you're welcome to talk.
I'd love to hear your stories or your reaction or questions. A lot of times people want to know how to go about researching this. Often when I'm doing this, I was doing this for a DAR chapter just a few days ago. And the lady, one of the chapter members and these are sad stories. And she talked about how it ripped through the entire family. And that's sort of what happened, especially in these rural areas, because there are no nurses. You're not going in a place like Selbyville or some small rural community, Berlin. You could probably see the doctor, but it's very rare. Very few are going to be going to Peninsula General Hospital for treatment. So it would rip through entire families.
I would imagine. And it's interesting how much it's spread in comparison today I know they had transportation and cars were around, but not everybody had a car. Not everybody could afford a car. Yeah. And yet it's still traveled, even in rural communities.
Yeah. And Elena, that's one of the things that gets the numbers down. Like we get on the lower part of the peninsula, you figure you sort of had social distancing already, because you probably went to town on Saturday to go to the bank, or maybe Friday night to go to the bank or the market, or to take your produce to market. But when this hit, people were alarmed. And one of the advantages we have, at least we have lots of, maybe it's a disadvantage too, lots of information. There was no shortage, but from CDC or your county executive, county council, sheriff, whatever, your county health department director, they could, we were glued to the TV at night those first weeks, so trying to see what we could do. The one positive I got out of this is, because I still teach, I sit a lot, and especially now with this, but I've got almost every day. Today I'm up by just north of the canal. It was very rainy up here. Did you have rain down your way, Elena? It was heavy rain up this way.
Yes, it did. It was weird. Just a side note, I do have a question for you, but my building was being power washed today, but it was also raining. So I was confused for a while this morning.
That would confuse you, would it not? Yeah, rain and power wash. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
Lee is sharing a story here. My great-grandfather of Bishopville, Maryland, died in the Spanish flu on October 16th, 1918, his 55th birthday. My grandmother talked about it all of her life. Oh, it had a big impact on our family and also changed the course of her life. I bet it did.
Yeah. Can Lee talk to us, or if he wants?
Yeah, if he wants. I'll give him allow him to talk.
Lee, do you mind? Can you hear us? And is your mic open?
He just has to click the microphone. There he is.
Okay. Am I here now? Yes.
Yeah, Lee, you're with us. Would you tell us that story firsthand? We would love to hear
Certainly. It. My grandmother was from Bishopville, Maryland. She was born in 1898. And in 1918, in that fall, she had moved to Philadelphia to get a job in a dress factory. She'd only been there for a few days when she got a telegram saying that her father was homesick with the Spanish flu. Things were looking bad. Come home. So she got a train to Bishopville. You could do that in those days. And went home to help her mother, who still had several of my grandmother's siblings living at home. And of course, my great-grandfather died, and it happened to be his 55th birthday, which also turned out to be several years later, 1925, my father's birthday. But my grandmother then did not return to Philadelphia. She had a high school diploma, which was unusual for that time. And there was a normal school offered. And so in 1919, somewhere thereabouts, she attended normal school and was certified to be a school teacher. And she taught at one-room schoolhouses. And her last teaching job was in Delaware, near Bayard, Delaware. And that's how she met my grandfather. Had her father not got sick with the flu, odds are that she would have stayed in Philadelphia and I wouldn't be here.
Yeah. Isn't it interesting, Lee, how this all you never know how the triangulation is going to work out with these things. Did the story, it sounds like the story was always passed down in your family too. I had some folks.
Hear as much from her brothers. They lived further away. One was in Laurel, the other was in Philadelphia.
Mhm.
But her sisters continued to live there in Bishopville, and they all of them would talk about that. I mean, it really had a big impact on her life. And she talked about the Spanish flu that took her father, and he was so young, and a very healthy man.
Yeah.
So that it was a big part of her life, and it was something that she brought up often. So us kids, we all heard about it.
Yeah. And things. I was doing some work over at the NAB Center, and they actually have a few letters about the flu in Lower Delmarva. Lee, thanks for sharing that. That's excellent. Thanks so much.
Well, you're certainly welcome.
Do we have another one?
Thank you for sharing. We do have another one from Mitch. Salisbury papers at the time reported that some small rural towns in Wycomico County would quarantine at their borders and prohibit visitors from bigger cities that had outbreaks from coming in. Did you notice any of that in your research? I bet that was difficult to enforce.
Mitch, I did not, but it would be something. Maybe I'll go back and take a second look. Are you picking that up off of the digital? Can Mitch talk to us if he wants to?
He can.
Mitch, do you mind talking to us? I always like to talk to people. Yeah, Mitch, there's your mic. Go ahead. Did you access that off of the NAB Center or digitized newspapers for the Lower Shore? Well, I'll get, so, yeah, okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
The audio might not be working for, I don't know why.
Yeah.
Depends on the, but he says he did put in the,
Well,
he did type.
Think of
Yes,
the
exactly.
Yeah, think of the paranoia, Mitch, this caused, and the last thing I guess we saw a little bit of it like last March, the tension, there was a tension out on I think there was anyway, out on the street and things like that and things. But think of in 1918, the paranoia that caused. Up in Wilmington, they had a real police department. And the police department was very much, and that you can find because you've got 2 or 3 city papers that are publishing every day up there. But the police department is very much involved in enforcing this, and they do not want strangers in Wilmington. It was almost a funny side thing. So end of October, they decided they're going to lift the quarantine in Wilmington. After about 2 days, they put it back on the taverns. The problem was Pennsylvania and New Jersey had not lifted their quarantine. And then people that were a little dry, let's say, and needed a drink from Chester and Marcus Hook and Pennsauken, they were flooding into Wilmington. And this guy who's the chief up there, he says, I got too many people are sick. I can't control these taverns. So they shut down, they made taverns close at 4 p.m. And the police were involved up there enforcing the social, the public health orders too. Like they were really big on spitting on the street was a big thing up there. They would have their volunteer fire departments. The city still had volunteer fire departments. They go out and hose down the streets every night, but the police would make arrests for it too. But no, Mitch, thanks. That's a great tip. I'll take a second look at that because it's the stories like you and Lee and folks have shared that strengthen these types of things, the accounts.
Absolutely. 7 o'clock. So if anybody has any questions, please ask them. And if not, I thank everybody for being here. Thank you for
Elena, I've been spending a lot of time in the cemetery. Always, the work I do, you always spend a lot of time. People kind of make fun of me, but I was really interested, everybody, in the soldiers because I don't think I realized. So I really started, it's pretty close with the soldiers. The Navy is not, they're not. But so I've made a mission of all across the region, and I'm really anxious to get out and ramble about. I think I'm going to do a Lower Shore tour really soon, and I'll go to find a grave and find the soldiers. And if I find them like September 18th or October, I get it. No, it could be war action, but I go visit them and try to document a little bit more. In part, like Parsons Cemetery, they from a very helpful group that's doing their mission. They were really wonderful. 3 or 4 people over there just knew exactly what I was looking for and put it in my hand. So I do try, and you know, to a great degree, these were forgotten people, and so I try to spotlight, especially those frontline people who live such a great risk and such a great hazard. Lena, what I'll do tomorrow or maybe later tonight, I will send you a bibliography. That a film we started off with, everybody. If you have another question, pop in, because I think I'm fine with time. That's an hour-long documentary, and it's from the National Public Health Service. And you saw Dr. Fauci in there. Looked a little bit younger. I think the film's about 12 years old and things. And you may want to watch that. And that Philadelphia story, there's a little bit longer edition of that. And there are several really good books if you want to read it. And I'll send Elena something that she can distribute to you, because you can blast it out to everybody. It's registered, right, Elena?
Yes, I can.
Yeah,
Before so yes, everybody that signed up, I can just email it to all of them. They'll get it. The same way you got the reminder email with the Zoom link. And John would like to say, very interesting and enjoyable, exclamation point. Thank you for this presentation.
Thanks, John. Thanks, everybody.
Great program from Elizabeth. Yes, very, very interesting. So thank you, everybody, for your time. Yep, there you go. Thanks for attending from Professor Dixon.
Oh, you get to be a good multitasker, especially when you're keeping up with 20-year-olds.
Jeez.
Thanks,
right?
everybody. Thanks so much. Thanks for having me.
See you
Bye.
at the next one. Take care.
Oh, can I register for tomorrow's program? What was it? Postcards, local photos, your local.
You have to do it. You have until tomorrow at 11, I believe it is.
And what time does it take place?
It's set 2.
Okay, I can do. I may register. I'll go check it out when I get off.
You'll see you can see our local history librarian that way.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks so much, Elena. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
All right, take care. Have a good night.